A warm welcome to the program today. I'm Amarachi Ubani in Lagos. Here are the stories making our headlines this hour. Russia threatens Lithuania over its ban on the transit of goods sanctioned by the EU to Russia's enclave of Kaliningrad. The UK capital falls silent over the country's biggest railway strike, the first or the biggest in 30 years. Plus, France's President Emmanuel Macron on the search for the right coalition to take back control of the National Assembly. Welcome again, everyone, and here are the latest updates and developments in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland has added his voice to the invasion, promising Ukraine his help in prosecuting war crimes committed since the invasion began on February 24. In a press conference following his meeting with Ukraine's Prosecutor General, Irina Venediktova, near the Polish-Ukrainian border, he told reporters, "I'm here to express the unwavering support of the United States for the people of Ukraine in the midst of the unprovoked and unjust Russian invasion." Meanwhile, Turkish media is saying a military delegation will be traveling to Russia this week to discuss details of a possible sea corridor in the Black Sea for Ukrainian grain exports. A four-way meeting is planned between Turkey, Ukraine, Russia and the United Nations within 10 days. Finally, Ukraine says it has finally deployed advanced German artillery system and the latest delivery of the long-range precision weapons that it has been calling for. Ukraine's Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov wrote on social media, "Panzer Haubitz 2000 are finally part of 155mm howitzer arsenal of the Ukrainian artillery." A top ally of President Vladimir Putin has told Lithuania Moscow will respond to its ban on the transit of goods sanctioned by the EU to Russia's enclave of Kaliningrad in such a way that citizens of the Baltic state will feel the pain. With relations between Russia and the West at a half-century low over what Moscow calls its special military operation in Ukraine, Lithuania banned the transit of goods sanctioned by the European Union across its territory to and from the enclave, citing EU sanction rules. Nikolai Patrushev, a former KGB spy, who is now the Secretary of Russia's Security Council, said Lithuania's hostile actions show that Russia could not trust the West, which it said had broken written agreements over Kaliningrad. According to him, Russia will certainly respond to such hostile actions. He was quoted as saying on Russian media. Lithuania, a member of NATO and the European Union, says it was simply applying agreed EU sanctions on Russia, adding it was ironic to hear Moscow's complaints given its military operation in Ukraine. For those living in Kaliningrad, sandwiched between the EU and NATO members, Poland and Lithuania are pretty fearful and regrets, filled with fear and regret over Lithuania's transit ban on Monday against goods coming from Russia. A number of them said construction works will stop. Development of roads, it's only going to get worse, many think. They also think that people will lose their jobs because there's still no other option, according to some of the residents. Many of them have been urged not to resort to panic buying. According to Representative of Kaliningrad region, the government's Dmitry Luskyov, two vessels already ferrying goods between Kaliningrad and St. Petersburg, and 7 more will be in service by the end of the year. Lithuanian authorities say a ban on the transit through their territory to the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad of goods that are subject to EU sanctions will take place from Saturday. It's already in effect. The ban on the news of the ban, beg your pardon, came on Friday through a video posted by the region's governor Anton Alikanov. EU sanctions list notably includes coal, metals, construction materials, and advanced technology. According to Alikanov, the ban will cover around 50% of items that Kaliningrad imports. Well, Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev says he thinks Russia's President Vladimir Putin has no plans to cut off gas supplies to Europe, adding that Mr. Putin was a staunch ally of Kazakhstan. He was making the comment at the Qatar Economic Forum in Doha. President Tokayev said there needs to be a more significant supply response from OPEC Plus oil-producing countries over the summer. And his country has capacity to quickly boost oil output to 100 tons per year. Kazakhstan is not a member of the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, but it does have observer status at the group and is a member of the broader OPEC Plus. Asked about his thoughts on the upcoming July visit by U.S. President Joe Biden to Saudi Arabia, President Tokayev said with a grin he wanted a friendly and predictable relationship with the United States. A comment met with laughter and applause from the audience. Now, the British government says it's determined to impose further sanctions on Russia and will do so until Moscow fully withdraws from Ukraine. That's according to Foreign Minister Liz Truss. Truss said she would be traveling to Turkey tomorrow to discuss options to help get grain out of Odessa, saying there was only a matter of weeks to find a solution before a new harvest had to begin with storage already filled with grain from last year's harvest. Britain, the United States and the European Union have coordinated imposing massive sanctions on Moscow for what they call an invasion of Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin has termed it a military operation.
More weapons. We are doing all we can to secure the export of that very important grain from Ukraine. And my honourable friend is right, we only have a number of weeks to be able to achieve that. We're backing the UN plan, but we are also doing what we can with our allies to provide safe passage, to make sure that Odessa is fully defended. And tomorrow I'll be travelling to Turkey to talk to them about how we can do more to get the grain out of Odessa. This is about freedom and democracy in Ukraine, and it's also about freedom and democracy in Europe and across the world. That's why we're determined to provide more weapons, impose more sanctions, and back Ukraine in pushing Russia out of their territory. And we will continue to impose sanctions. We will continue to stop importing goods from Russia until we see Russia fully withdraw from Ukraine.
Dave Dougal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, Big Macs and McFlurries may be off the menu at McDonald's successor restaurants in Russia, but the new firm has ambitious growth targets after it sold almost 120,000 burgers, a record on its opening day, according to its chief executive. McDonald's Corporation has fully exited Russia, selling all the restaurants it owned to a local licensee in May. Under the new name, Vkusno and Tochka, or Tasty and That's It. 50 restaurants in and around Moscow reopened on June 12th and 13th. Chief Executive Oleg Paryov is keen to add locations, but acknowledged the challenge of replacing some ingredients and suppliers, as well as dealing with other franchises still using McDonald's branding. The McDonald's exit saga shows both how difficult it is for Western consumer businesses that decided to leave over Moscow's actions in Ukraine to sever all ties to Russia, and for local operators to replace popular brands. Thousands of people who came to Vkusno and Tochka's flagship opening in Moscow's Pushkin Square were greeted with the new logo, a color scheme, and packaging shorn of all McDonald's branding, as the new company lost its rights to the U.S. group's trademark and intellectual property.
Несколько наших предприятий действительно поставили в этот день, в день открытия, исторический рекорд по дневному товарообороту. То есть дневной объем продаж по некоторым нашим предприятиям действительно поставил исторический рекорд. То есть такого дневного товарооборота мы не видели никогда за всю.
Well, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says Africa is a hostage in the war with Russia, which had contributed to rising food prices on the continent. African countries are acutely affected by the growing crisis, which has sent prices of grains, cooking oils, fuel and fertilizers soaring. In a speech to African Union leaders earlier this week, President Zelensky said the continent had been caught up in the situation not of its making. Moscow rejects accusations it deliberately is blocking grain exports from Ukraine and says global food and fuel price hikes are due to Western sanctions imposed on Russia over the February 24 invasion, which it calls a special military operation. Now, in early June, Senegal's president, Macky Sall, said Russia's President Vladimir Putin had told him he was ready to enable the export of Ukrainian grain to ease a global food crisis that was hitting Africa especially hard. We have the VOA's Anna Chernikova joining us now from Kyiv. Anna, great to see you as always. Thanks for joining us. And now all the buzz now is, of course, on Kaliningrad. And, you know, the Russians are, the Russian President Vladimir Putin threatening the country over its ban on EU imports. But in the eyes of Lithuania, I mean, it did nothing wrong. It simply had to side with the EU on this because it really isn't strong enough to stand on its own, is it?
Well, I think this is very, internal of the EU and Lithuania. So there are certain, rules, new rules in terms of sanctions that they have to follow. And I think this is a very internal question that should be, discussed and negotiated between probably the Russian authorities and Lithuanian authorities. And I think this is the best way, I guess, and this is how also here we see that it's, something that two countries should discuss and negotiate, and this is probably, well, of course, we don't know all the details and we don't know all the, additional questions that this might, bring up from both sides, but definitely this is something that these two countries should, discuss and come to a certain agreement between each other. But of course, it's a very difficult situation because, sanctions are ongoing, and unfortunately or fortunately, this we don't. I mean, every side would have its own opinion on that, but. Probably, unfortunately for Kaliningrad, it's something that they're just in the middle, and this is definitely a difficulty that the government should just negotiate on.
Yeah, and we're seeing, Russia's backlash in all of these countries surrounding Ukraine, which are taking sides with Ukraine against Russia. And I'm just wondering, what the Ukrainian government thinks about this and what their response is, to Russia. All of these other countries seem to be putting their own relationships on the line, the relations with Russia, putting them on the line for Ukraine. Does the Ukrainian government appreciate that?
Well, Ukrainian government as well as Ukrainian society appreciate the help that European society and international society in general, all the international partners, have for Ukraine. But definitely for Ukraine, the relations and this, very internal questions between other countries, it's not probably something that Ukraine at least, publicly appreciate. So if we talk about officials and if we talk about official position of the country, this is, this internal politics and political decisions that Ukraine probably, at least we don't have any, particular comments or encouragements or appreciation. But of course, this is something that shows that sanctions are working and that sanctions is not just, just words. It's basically rules that the country is following. And of course, it's really, it's really great to see that sanctions are working, because this is exactly the reason why the sanctions were introduced, because Russia started the war in Europe, and Ukraine for the moment is protecting the whole Europe and the whole, free world, so-called. And I mean, of course, it's, I think that this is important, and for Ukraine, it's great to see that sanctions are working. But in particular, this particular situation, we don't really have, so far at least, certain, official announcements. Maybe it's coming later, but for the moment, this is how it is here in Ukraine.
Yeah, and you know, people will be looking out for President Zelensky's response. He's the one who's called out even some world leaders, Germany, for instance, asking them to do more. President Macron, he criticized his relations with the Russian president as well. But this is also the first time we've heard the Ukrainian president talk about Africa, describing the continent as a hostage in the war with Russia. Many African countries do have enjoy cordial relations with Russia. Does the Ukrainian president expect that African leaders will begin to rethink their relations with Russia because they want to sympathize with Ukraine?
You know, I think this is, you know, quite a global question, because globally a lot of countries probably will have to rethink, because unfortunately, because of this war that Russia started in Ukraine, a lot of countries around the world are suffering. So basically, we can see that the whole world is suffering from, you know, some more, some less, some countries more, some countries less, but in general, everyone, because, well, a lot of food production is coming from Ukraine, especially if we talk about African continent and African countries. And of course, you know, everything should be probably rethink, and at least, you know, it's a new step definitely for many countries, for different countries and for different governments. It's, of course, it's very difficult, you know, geopolitical question and, you know, political relations, but every country should look at it, you know, with a long-term perspective. And of course, in long-term perspective, Russia is not doing, you know, a favor for a lot of countries and a lot of regions. So, well, probably, yes, probably this is not only about, you know, African countries, but just in general, as we also can see that, for example, EU countries, they are rethinking their relationship with Russia in terms of oil and gas. And probably this is something that other countries that depend on, and that, you know, that depend on food production that comes from Ukraine, and that depend, you know, in general on the food market that comes from Ukraine, should definitely also, well, probably rethink. But again, we'll see. And again, it's not some, you know, official announcements or official comments on that yet in particular. So I can just, you know, analyze it as, you know, as a general picture.
Anna, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up after the break on The World Today. Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson criticizes the railway strikes for causing unnecessary aggravation. His words once again. Welcome back to The World Today. Commuters in London resorted to cycling to work today as Britain's biggest rail strike in 30 years kicked off, paralysing the transport network in the country. Tens of thousands of staff walked out and disputed over pay and jobs that could pave the way for widespread industrial action across the economy in coming months. Some of the more than 40,000 rail workers who are due to strike today, Thursday and on Saturday gathered at picket lines from dawn, leaving the network at standstill and major stations deserted. The London Underground Metro was also mostly closed due to a separate strike. Unions have said the rail strikes could mark the start of a summer of discontent, with teachers, medics, waste disposal workers and even barristers moving towards industrial action as surging food and fuel prices push inflation towards 10%. The government has faced criticism from opposition lawmakers for refusing to get involved in the talks to settle the dispute. Ministers say it is a matter for the unions to work out directly with rail employers. The Channels Television spoke to some commuters in London to find out what they made of the strike and how this would impact on their movement around the city.
I am for what is happening today. I'm not into unions, but when people work hard, they need to have, you know, some kind of reward. And if you get people working all the time, but the bosses are seeing their pay in millions, and the hard workers, however sluggish, they must be paid. They have families. That's very important. See, they have families and they have to look after their wives and children or their husbands, or these days we have house husbands, so you can imagine what I'm trying to talk about. And it's very essential that these people are paid, and they have to be paid according to the times. I mean, right now, before the COVID, pay and food was okay. COVID times, food started rising, and it's become worse. I mean, you buy 2 apples for £1. Have you heard that before? 2 apples for £1. Come on. So you pay them because the bosses are being paid. Of course, I know the bosses. I am a boss myself, but I know we bosses take a lot of income. You see? But those who are the tools, we have to oil them so that they perform better. And that's the way it must go.
Well, to be honest, I'm happy that I was able to get a train from Luton Airport to King's Cross St Pancras, so that's good. But then the second half of my journey, getting down to South London, is going to be hard. So, yeah, it's just a disruption to my day. I need to be at work in the afternoon as well, logging in from home. So, yeah, it's not great. Apocalyptic, as you say. I'm not sure if everybody sees it that way now that people can work from home. It affects people's life a little bit differently, but yeah, it's still not great. I'm not sure if they're trying to pit the unions against the public. I'm not sure if the public necessarily see that way. There's been fights between the government and the unions for years. They just need to sit down and kind of flesh out an agreement somehow. They usually get there eventually. So yeah, this has been happening for years, maybe not at this level, but they just need to get down and negotiate and come to a solution.
Because like I'm an A-level student, so like I have all my exams, so a lot of people were late, like, and especially because it's like exam season, it's impacting our like grades and like our futures.
I think, yeah, like she said, it impacts everyone, and due to strikes, you know, people feel lost and they just don't know what to do. There's some, like, I sympathise with them, but like it's also frustrating at the same time for like us Londoners. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like they do deserve a pay rise. Like, these strikes will hopefully let the TfL Rail know that there needs to be a change. The exam boards themselves have not been sympathising, but like my school have like started exams later just to give people like a chance to like start and just get the grades they want.
Our correspondent Juliana Olaika there on the streets of London, getting a cross-section of the opinions of people today, many of whom had to resort to other means to get to work, I suppose. Juliana joins me now. So what is the message exactly they were giving out? Were they in support of the strike, or did they find this an inconvenience?
Good afternoon, Amarachi. Well, there's just been a flash poll by YouGov, which is a data opinions firm. And according to them, 37% of the British public are in agreement with the unions and the strikes. 45% disagree, and I think it's that 45% that the British government are going to be pushing with this week. And you're right, I was in King's Cross a couple of hours ago, and there was a cross-section of opinion. The thing is, if you're in London, then you would have been impacted by the strike, because, of course, not only were Network Rail down, the London tubes were also down. There were just a handful of train services that were running today. And what does that mean? That means it took you probably an extra hour or so to get to your office. And if you are fortunate enough to be working in a kind of flexible industry, we know we've just gone through a pandemic, lots of companies are offering staff the opportunity to work from home, but not everybody can do that. Like those students we spoke to, if you're sitting an exam at 11 o'clock and somebody is able to walk to that exam centre at 10:45, they're going to make the exam. If you live an hour away and it's taking you 3 hours to get into the exam, then that's going to be a real issue. Also, as well, we've been hearing from a lot of Londoners that have been complaining about the surcharge for Ubers and Bolts. If you can't get in a bus and you want to get in a taxi, then you are paying triple what you were paying before. So I think it's really difficult for union bosses to get the sympathy of the public. But then again, when you're going through a cost of living crisis, lots of people are talking about lots of these big firms profiteering, you know, tripling and quadrupling their bottom line profits when people are struggling to put your food on the table. It's a delicate balancing act. But when, you know, push comes to shove and you can't get to the office because somebody has decided to go on the picket line, then of course it's pretty easy to point the finger at why this is happening.
Yeah, I did wonder about that, about students and how that impacts on those who still have to get to school and all that. You have your kids to also pick up, I think, in a few minutes. And so we'll just keep this short because movement around the city, of course, will be a little tougher. But it doesn't seem like the government is interested in resolving the crisis. Now, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, we'll hear in a minute, says the strike will cause unnecessary aggravation. How does that compare, to his attitude about this time a couple of weeks ago, when his job was on the line? And does his expression also reflect that of other members of his government?
Gosh, you're absolutely right. It's a really good comparison, especially because if you think of unions and kind of, their context and their history, it's typically the Red Wall seats, which Boris Johnson was able to claim victory of in the 2019 election, that they are striking on behalf of. They're striking on behalf of the working man. And I think for any Tory minister, speaking out against the unions is a pretty comfortable situation to be in. It's very, very rare that you would ever hear a Conservative MP support a union boss. But again, this is a really delicate balancing act for him. In terms of who is speaking on behalf of the government, it has been Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, who's been in lots of trouble this week because, of course, this travel chaos isn't just affecting the rails, it's also affecting the airlines and the airports, and people have been struggling to try and get out of this country on a flight that hasn't been cancelled or delayed. I think the big talking point at the moment has got to be the suggestion that the Conservative government may change the law so that if there is any further strike, rather than millions of commuters suffering and being told to work from home, the government may actually bring in agency staff at the last minute to cover the positions of these striking staff. And that is going to be a big issue. And some have said that even the suggestion of that is going to cause more disruption within the unions, because, of course, the reason why you have a union is so that you are able to strike, you are able to take this industrial action, and you are able to stick up for the rights of your workers. If the government now decide that they can get an agency worker to do your job, then what's the point of striking in the first place? So I don't know if that's going to go down too well. Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary, is the one who's going to be looking into this to see if the government will be able to do this without breaking international law. But as we've seen with Brexit, as we've seen with Partygate, this Conservative government don't seem to be adverse of breaking the law because they have done it in the past. It is a sticky issue. But again, I don't think anyone in Britain would expect a Conservative a Prime Minister to stand in support of the union bosses. But this is a big issue because, as you said, this is day one, Amarachi. We've still got a couple more days and lots of headache to come.
Yeah, and the strike begins today, then there's a break, continues on Thursday, there's another break, and then it happens on Saturday. Not quite the usual pattern we see with strike actions. It's usually, a block of time that people go on strike for. So what happens in between?
Gosh, unfortunately, what happens in between is more disruption because these are 24-hour strikes. I believe the RMT union, even the government, put out a statement, I believe, on Friday saying, look, don't think that this is just going to affect those 3 days. Your entire week is going to be disrupted because, of course, there is still engineering work that's supposed to be taking place overnight. There are systems that need to be in place. So we're not expecting a full service tomorrow. And you talk about why was this done this way? I think these were coordinated strikes. I think the RMT union were able to look at the diary. We've got huge events taking place across Britain in the next couple of days. I think the biggest one has got to be Glastonbury. I've never had the opportunity to go there, but it is one of the biggest music festivals in the world. I believe it starts on Friday and it's a 3-day event. So many people have had to go up there already because they just can't get the service. We've got Royal Ascot extended for a couple of days. We've got the British Athletics taking place over the weekend. So I think, these days were chosen to hurt I don't want to say the British public, but definitely the British transport system perfectly. And it seems as if that's exactly what's happened.
Yeah, I guess so. Juliana, thanks again for speaking with us. We'll let you go now, and hopefully the government does listen. I know that the Prime Minister is having talks with his government today, and they might be coming out with a statement in the next few hours. Thanks again. Well, speaking about the government, Prime Minister Boris Johnson said at a cabinet meeting holding today, rail strikes across the country will cause unnecessary aggravation. Tens of thousands of workers walked out on the first day of Britain's biggest rail strike in 30 years today, with passengers facing further chaos as both the unions and government vow to stick to their guns in a row over pay. Some of the more than 40,000 rail staff are due to strike not just today, but Thursday and Saturday. They're gathered at picket lines from dawn, causing major disruption across the network, leaving major stations deserted. The London Underground Metro was also mostly closed due to a separate strike. Prime Minister Boris Johnson is under pressure to do more to help Britons face the toughest economic hit in decades. He says the strike at this time would harm businesses still recovering from COVID. But unions have said the rail strikes could mark the start of a summer of discontent. Medics, teachers, waste disposal workers, even barristers heading for industrial action are participating as well, supporting the strike. They're all protesting. Inflation rising up to 10%. Prime Minister Johnson told his cabinet that his message to the country is that they need to be ready to stay the course as improvements to the railways are run. To the way the railways are run are in the public's best interest, according to a survey by YouGov, as Juliana mentioned earlier this month. Public opinion is divided. Around half of those questioned oppose the action, and just over a third say that they support it.
Railways, and we love them. We believe in our railways, we believe in our railway infrastructure as a vital part of levelling up across the whole of the country. And I'm proud to be inaugurating Northern Powerhouse Rail. This is, I was proud, by the way, to be the Mayor of London who started Crossrail in London, and the Prime Minister who completed Crossrail. We need Crossrail for the north of our country as well, and that is what we are doing. I think Grant are selling roughly one ticket per hour. We need to get those staff out from behind plate glass onto the platforms, Network Rail and the train companies, and get on with it. And we need, I'm afraid, everybody, and I say this to the country as a whole, we need to get ready to stay the course. To stay, it will go bust, and the result will be they have to hike up the cost of tickets still further, so that people don't use the railways at all, or use them much less than they used to. And that will, I think, be a disaster for this country and for our economy. Folks, this government was elected to do the difficult things and to stay the course, and I hope very much that I can count on your support, and of course count on your support for Grant in everything that he does every day. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Interesting times for French elections. Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne today convened a meeting with members of her cabinet as President Macron's centrist camp efforts to make new alliances after losing absolute majority in Parliament heats up. The President, Emmanuel Macron, refused to accept Borne's resignation and met with opposition leaders today as he sought a way out of the political predicament. Disaffected voters angry over spiraling inflation and Macron's perceived indifference towards hard-up families delivered a hung parliament in Sunday's election, leaving the president's centrist alliance several dozen seats short of a ruling majority. Amidst a centrist ensemble bloc will need to find support from among the opposition benches in order to salvage his reform agenda. The election delivered a fragmented parliament and plunged France into uncharted waters with no rule book on how to exit the crisis. Three members of Borne's cabinet, the Health Minister Brigitte Bourguignon, Ecology Minister Amélie de Montchalon, and Junior Minister Forces Justin Binet, lost elections in their respective constituencies and are expected to step down. In the meantime, the Conservatives have dismissed any kind of coalition or pact with President Emmanuel Macron's camp, as leaders of the opposition parties also met today with the president in the aftermath of the election they held on Sunday, leaving a hung parliament. Macron's centrist alliance won the most seats in Sunday's legislative vote, but it fell well short of an absolute majority that he needs to rule with a free hand during his second term after a first mandate known for its top-down approach. Les Républicains says it will be responsible and will not block institutions. Sunday's elections delivered a fragmented parliament in which the far right has its biggest contingent ever in France and is the singer's biggest opposition party. A broad left-wing alliance altogether won the second largest number of seats. Well, let's bring in now political commentator Mahmoudou Bassam. He's in Paris. Mahmoudou, I am hoping you can hear me. What does the president's party really need to form a government?
Hi, how are you? Fine. The president party need to form a government to have 3 or 4 solutions. The first solution is to have a national unity, a government of national unity, and I think that it is not what he will do. Or not, the second solution is to discuss with the right and the center party, make a government. Or the third solution is to change his prime minister government or not. Now, Emmanuel Macron...
Okay. Sorry, go on.
Emmanuel Macron is, it is the situation, he didn't think about it at first, before the election. And that's why I think that he will take time to take his decision. That's why today he discussed with all party politics.
So what party really aligns properly, with the president's values and, his policies? Because the other parties, the leaders of the other parties, Le Pen, Mélenchon, none of them agree with him.
I think that the Republicans have, with their political program, is the same like Emmanuel Macron parties. But what it is in the action, they have some difference.
So they're all the same. They basically have, the same ideologies. It's just the execution that's different. So why wouldn't they work with him then?
Why they don't work? Because in the past, there are some... Emmanuel Macron do something is news. When he arrives, he say, no Republican, no social. I'm in the middle. And some politics come with him. And that's why the Republican lose a lot of mayor and lose some elections. And that's why the Republican didn't want to work with him.
What happens if the president at the end of the week or after a certain period of time is not able to make that coalition in the National Assembly?
What happened? It's something we don't know. It is the first time it arrived in France. I think that if he don't have solution, he will maintain his prime minister and go on with his politics.
Wow, never been in this situation before. President Emmanuel Macron, thank you so much, Mahmoudou, for speaking with us.
Thank you.
Still ahead on the program, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi front and center on this International Day of Yoga. Stay with us. Welcome back to The World Today. We'll stay with politics, but in Israel this time, where 2 members of the outgoing coalition government have vowed to prevent a comeback of former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, their fellow right-winger, as the country braces for a 5th election in 4 years, with polling predicting no clear winner. Sapped by infighting that ended his razor-thin parliamentary majority, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett on Monday announced he would move to dissolve the Knesset, with Foreign Minister Yair Lapid assuming top office in a caretaker capacity. A preliminary vote on that motion is set for tomorrow, Wednesday. The prospect of an election as early as October delighted Mr. Netanyahu. He is Israel's longest-serving leader, after all, who was toppled a year ago after Bennett mustered a rare coalition of hard, right, liberal and Arab politicians. He said his conservative Likud party would lead the next government. Yohanan Plesner, president of the Israel Democracy Institute, said although Israel has a strong democracy, the usual number of election rounds could lead to instability. Well, Lebanon, Syria and Egypt have all agreed to ship 650 million cubic meters of natural gas per year from Egypt to Lebanon via Syria. It's part of a U.S.-backed effort to address Lebanon's crippling blackouts with electricity and gas transfers. The deal, signed at a ceremony at a Lebanese energy ministry in Beirut, will see gas piped to Lebanon's northern Deir Amma power plant, where it could add some 450 megawatts, or around 4 extra hours of power to the grid. However, it still requires the approval of the World Bank, which has pledged financing, and the United States for compliance with its Syria sanctions regime. Lebanon announced the agreement alongside representatives from Egypt and Syria, as well as Magdi Galau, chairman of the state-owned Egyptian natural gas holding. Tesla's chief executive Elon Musk says there are still a few unresolved matters with his Twitter deal, including the number of spam users on the system and the coming together of the debt portion of the deal. Elon Musk is also the world's richest person, according to Forbes magazine. He agreed to buy Twitter for a whopping $44 billion, but currently says he's still awaiting resolution on the very significant matter. Musk spoke to at the Qatar Economic Forum organized by Bloomberg, said regarding the economy, it's still more likely than not that there is a recession in the near term. He said over the next 3 months, Tesla expects to see a 10% reduction in salaried workforce, leading to about 3.5% reduction in total headcounts. Charges are described as not super material. So the Brics has played a crucial role in ensuring countries in the global south are not sidelined, providing them with COVID-19 vaccine aid and strengthening infrastructure building through the new development bank. That's according to a South African expert, Professor Anil Suklau, Deputy Director for Asia and the Middle East for South Africa's Department of International Relations and Cooperation. He recently highlighted the role of the Brics mechanism in ensuring the voices of developing countries are heard on the international stage. And a look now at the flood waters inundating most of Bangladesh and northeast India. Situation today, authorities still struggling to reach more than 9.5 million people stranded with little food and drinking water after days of intense rain. In India's Assam state, flooding has cut off 3 districts in the Barg Valley, and the water in part of the region's main city of Silchar is waist deep. Indian Army and paramilitary troops have been called in to help with rescue operations and had evacuated about 1,000 people in the past 72 hours. Assam and neighboring Meghalaya state have received 134% more rainfall than the average at this time of the year, according to data from the state-run India Meteorological Department. Officials say about 4.7 million people have been forced from their homes in Assam, some 330,000 staying in shelters. Extreme weather in the South Asia has become more frequent, and its environmentalists warn climate change could lead to even more serious disasters.
A lot of people have come out to the street now, and we are taking care of them. We are providing all the help they require. Relief has just arrived and they have been distributed. We are distributing tarpaulin and all these things. The drinking water facility also will be provided within a short period of time. So we are doing that.
Sir, approximately how many people have been affected in your district, sir?
It is around 42,000 plus people. They have been affected by this.
look at those rising waters turning streets into rivers. Meanwhile, floods continue to batter Bangladesh, hampering residents' access to food. On top of that, leaving at least 32 people dead since late last week. Bangladesh is experiencing monsoon downpours that triggered catastrophic flooding in the northeastern Sylhet district, leaving around a quarter of its 15 million population stranded amid fast rising waters and swollen rivers. Government authorities are attempting to deliver 1,720 tons of rice and 58,000 packets of dry food, as well as water purification tablets and medicines to flood-hit communities. And as we end the program, it is International Day of Yoga, and India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi, well, he is a real yoga enthusiast. He performed a number of exercises with thousands of participants in the southern city of Mysuru. Prime Minister Modi and thousands of yoga enthusiasts gathered at the Mysore Palace early this morning, where they performed a variety of different yoga asanas, that's poses, and breathing exercises to promote the benefits of yoga and to mark the occasion. Prime Minister Modi pushed for the annual event to be held worldwide after winning power in 2014, where the lifestyle industry centered on the ancient physical and spiritual discipline estimated to be worth around $80 billion. The event was one of numerous mass yoga gatherings held across the country today in a sign of revival after celebrations had been muted for the past 2 years due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
ಬಲಪಾದದ ಪಕ್ಕದಲ್ಲಿಡಿ अब श्वास भरे वापस आई ಉಸಿರನ್ನ ತೆಗೆದುಕೊಳ್ಳುತ್ತಾ ಮೊದಲನೇ ಸ್ಥಿತಿಗೆ ಬನ್ನಿ.
Well, a call to stay healthy wherever you are. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.